It's 1942. The Pacific is a furnace, every island a battlefield, every cloud hiding the possibility of an attack. An American reconnaissance pilot is sweeping across a stretch of ocean when something catches his eye, a Japanese airfield that shouldn't exist. Runways, fuel depots, maintenance sheds, rows and rows of Japanese fighter planes neatly lined up, like they're waiting for takeoff. He circles once, twice, checks his instruments. No, it's real. It has to be real. He snaps photos and radios the report back to base. Command hears the magic words. Large Japanese air presence detected. High-value target. That's all it takes. Within hours, American B-25s and B-26 are thundering off island runways, loaded with enough explosives to melt an entire airfield off the map. The flight crews feel good. They feel confident. This is payback after Pearl Harbor. This is how you win a war. But here's the twist. The kind nobody saw coming. The planes they destroyed weren't planes at all. They were bamboo, wood, paint, string, nothing more. Because what the US Air Force bombed that day was not a Japanese stronghold. It was a stage set, a full-scale, handcrafted, meticulously arranged dummy airfield built by Japanese. Engineers using cheap materials, island wood, and an almost comedic level of creativity. But it wasn't a joke, and it definitely wasn't stupid. It was brilliant. Japan understood something early in the Pacific. War that most militaries still underestimate today. If you can't outbuild your enemy, outsmart him. If you can't stop his bombs, redirect them. So they built what American pilots later called bamboo bombers. Fake planes placed on fake, runways next to fake fuel trucks, under fake hangars that cast real, shadows in the real tropical sun. Up high, from 10,000 feet, the illusion was flawless. And America fell for it more than once. These weren't tiny props either. Some dummy aircraft were full-size replicas of Mitsubishi Zeros. Some had painted canopies. Some had wooden propellers that looked right when seen through an old reconnaissance camera. Japan even stacked wooden crates near the hangars to mimic ammunition storage. On certain islands, they built entire fake bases, roads, huts, even pretend tire marks on the runway. The idea was simple. Make America waste bombs on airfields that never mattered. Make them burn fuel flying to targets that didn't exist. Make them feel like they were winning when they weren't even hitting anything. And it worked. It worked so well that some missions wasted thousands of pounds of explosives on wooden silhouettes. Imagine being the American pilot flying away afterward, proud of the smoking craters you left behind, never realizing you just spent millions of dollars blowing up a set made of bamboo and rope. Here's the craziest detail. Sometimes, after an American bombing run, Japanese soldiers would run onto the field with hammers and nails, patch the wooden aircraft, repaint a few wings, prop them back up, and get ready for the next wave. Japan turned deception into an art form. A low-budget, handcrafted, island-made special effect that fooled some of the world's most powerful bombers. Because in the Pacific War, firepower mattered, but illusions could be just as deadly. And this was only the beginning. If point one was the shock, point two is the reveal. Because once you learn how Japan actually built these fake planes and dummy airfields, the whole story gets even more unbelievable. See, Japan didn't have the industrial power of the United States. America had Detroit. America had mass production, assembly lines, steel mills, and factories that could spit out a real fighter plane every few hours. Japan couldn't match that scale. They knew it. They felt it. They lived with that pressure every single day of the war. So instead of trying to compete with American steel, they turned to something else. Bamboo, wood, rope, and the creativity of soldiers who had no choice but to innovate. The Pacific Islands were filled with raw materials, dense forests, tall bamboo stalks, lightweight but strong, easy to cut, easy to shape, and, most importantly, dirt cheap. To the Japanese engineers stationed across the Pacific, it was an obvious solution. The plan was simple. If the Americans were going to bomb every airfield they saw, then Japan would build airfields that were meant to be bombed. The Japanese engineering units became something like battlefield carpenters. They studied the curves of real Mitsubishi Zeros and tried to recreate them using wooden ribs and bamboo frames. The results were shockingly close. Wings shaped out of woven bamboo, fuselages carved from palm wood, canopies made from stretched paper, and resin that reflected sunlight almost perfectly. Up close, they looked like props from a school play. From the air, they looked real enough to die for. But here's where the genius really kicks in. Japanese soldiers didn't just build fake planes. They built the illusion of a functioning military base. They carved fake tire tracks into the dirt using logs. They painted oil stains onto the edges of the runway. They stacked wooden boxes to look like ammunition crates. They placed bamboo fuel trucks next to bamboo fighters under bamboo hangars. And then, this is the part that American pilots couldn't believe when they learned it. They used mirrors and metal scraps to reflect sunlight like real aircraft. Nothing was random. Everything was deliberate. They even studied the way American cameras captured shadows from 10,000 or 20,000 feet. If a shadow wasn't dark enough, they adjusted the wings. If a reflection didn't look real, they added metal plates. If the runway looked too clean, they dragged barrels through the dirt to make it look busy. Japan wasn't just making decoys. They were making performances, staged specifically for American reconnaissance pilots watching from above. Some islands took it even further. There are reports of Japanese soldiers literally moving wooden planes around the airfield at dawn and dusk so that American pilots would think they were repositioning aircraft for missions. It was low-tech deception with high-impact results. And the best part? It worked because it looked boringly real. A fake tank is suspicious. A fake ship is suspicious. But a row of stationary planes on a quiet, dusty airstrip? American analysts saw that every day across the Pacific. So when Japan created that sight using bamboo and sheer brilliance, it slipped past the radar. Not because it was perfect, but because it felt ordinary. It felt like something the Americans expected to see. That's how a handful of carpenters and soldiers fooled the greatest air power on Earth. And while America wasted bombs, fuel, and flight hours destroying forests full of wooden ghosts, Japan saved its real aircraft for the battles that truly mattered. This wasn't improvisation. This was strategy. Quiet, clever, and extremely effective. If you think fake planes were clever, wait until you hear about Japan's dummy airfields. Because the Japanese didn't just stop at building wooden planes. They built entire fake airfields, complete with runways, hangars, fuel depots, and even control towers. Imagine it, vast stretches of dirt and grass, carefully shaped and painted to fool enemy reconnaissance. Planes flying high above the Pacific Ocean. These decoy airfields were masterclasses in deception. They were designed to attract American bombers, distract them, and save the real airfields from destruction. The process started with careful planning. Japanese engineers studied every detail of their operational bases. They mapped out the layout of runways, taxiways, parking areas, and surrounding buildings. Then they found remote locations with similar geography and recreated those layouts using cheap materials, bamboo, wood, canvas, and even painted sand. The runways were not real, of course, but from the air, painted lines and shadows created the illusion of freshly paved concrete strips. Grass patches were trimmed and arranged to mimic taxiways. Small wooden huts stood in for barracks and workshops. The entire site was arranged so that aerial photography would show a working airfield. And it didn't stop there. To simulate activity, Japanese troops sometimes created fake vehicles, wooden trucks and tanks positioned strategically. Mirrors and shiny metal scraps reflected the sun, mimicking glints from aircraft canopies or windows. They even staged fake smoke, controlled fires that gave the impression of operational industry or recent bomb damage, throwing off enemy intelligence estimates. To American pilots scanning from above, these decoys looked like high-value targets. The fake airfields gave the enemy something real looking to bomb, distracting them from the actual operational bases hidden nearby. This strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. By convincing American forces that they had found legitimate targets, Japan forced the Allies to waste precious bombs and fuel. Every bombing run on a dummy airfield was a successful defense without firing a shot. Several battles proved the effectiveness of this approach. In some cases, American reconnaissance photographs led to bombing raids that completely missed real bases by miles, hitting nothing but bamboo and sand. The psychological impact was significant too. American intelligence officers were left confused and frustrated by the poor results of some bombing raids. Their reports often showed targets that appeared operational on film, but subsequent ground reconnaissance found nothing. The Japanese decoy airfields sowed doubt in Allied planning, forcing them to question their intelligence and tactics. But there was a human cost. Japanese soldiers assigned to maintain and defend these dummy sites lived under constant threat. They had to set up and activate decoy fires and lights at precise times. Sometimes during air raids, they risked being caught in the bombing runs they helped attract. Yet they persisted. They understood the importance of their mission. Every bomb dropped on a fake airfield was a bomb that spared a real one. And every bomb that missed saved lives. In the end, Japan's dummy airfields were a critical piece of their defensive strategy in the Pacific War. They weren't just trickery, they were a lifeline. bought with ingenuity, courage, and sacrifice. While American forces eventually learned to recognize some decoys, the damage was done. Valuable resources had been diverted. Real bases survived, and the Japanese fought on longer than many predicted. This chapter of WWII is a testament to how creative strategy and simple materials can shape the course of a conflict. Imagine the vast Pacific battlefield where skies are filled with enemy aircraft, and every second counts. In this fierce arena, Japan unleashed a deceptive weapon unlike any other: bamboo bombers. These weren't your ordinary warplanes. They were carefully crafted replicas, made entirely of bamboo, wood, and paper, built to fool American pilots from high above. Why bamboo? Because it was cheap, lightweight, and abundant. Bamboo was the perfect material for crafting convincing yet disposable decoys. The Japanese used it to fashion full-sized airplanes, right down to painted insignias and realistic cockpit shapes. From the air, these dummy planes looked real. When viewed from a distance or through reconnaissance cameras, they mimicked the size and shape of operational fighters and bombers. The goal was clear: trick enemy pilots into thinking they had spotted active aircraft on the ground or in formation, forcing them to waste valuable ammunition and bombs. But the genius didn't stop at just the look. These bamboo bombers were often arranged on those same dummy airfields we discussed earlier, giving a complete illusion of an active base bristling with planes ready for battle. Japanese crews painstakingly placed them in realistic patterns, parked on makeshift runways, lined up like squadrons awaiting orders. Even when American forces launched bombing runs, many dropped their payloads on these lifeless wooden aircraft. The effect was devastating for the Americans' mission. Not only were valuable bombs wasted, but false intelligence fed into Allied command, giving the impression of a larger Japanese Air Force presence than actually existed. The decoy planes created confusion and uncertainty. There are stories of American pilots diving to strafe what appeared to be enemy planes on the ground, only to find nothing but hollow bamboo shells. These decoys bought precious time for Japan's real planes to operate. In several engagements, Japanese fighter squadrons used this distraction to launch surprise attacks, turning the tide in otherwise bleak situations. The bamboo bombers also had a psychological effect. Knowing that the enemy could deploy such clever deceptions forced American commanders to reconsider their reconnaissance and bombing strategies. It made them more cautious, slower to commit resources, and more vulnerable to Japanese counterattacks. Creating these wooden wonders wasn't easy. Skilled craftsmen and artists worked under tight secrecy, building the decoys to exact specifications. They had to balance realism with speed. Planes had to look believable, but be cheap enough to produce. In large numbers, time was critical. Each new decoy could mean the difference between survival and destruction for a vital airbase. Moreover, crews assigned to protect these decoys had to maintain the illusion, lighting fake engine fires, arranging fake tire tracks, and sometimes even simulating movement with ropes and pulleys. This level of detail helped fool enemy observers at all levels, from low-flying fighters to high-altitude bombers. The bamboo bomber program exemplified Japan's broader strategy of using resourcefulness and deception to compensate for material shortages and overwhelming Allied firepower. By blending artistry with military tactics, they turned simple materials into deadly strategic tools. Though these decoys never fired a shot, their contribution to the war effort was undeniable. They wasted enemy resources, saved real planes, and extended Japan's ability to fight in a rapidly evolving war. As the Pacific campaign raged on, these wooden aircraft became silent guardians of the skies, ghostly sentinels that, while fragile and empty, shaped the course of battles. In the grand story of WWII, bamboo bombers stand as a testament to the power of innovation under pressure, and how even the simplest materials can be weaponized in war. In the vast, unforgiving Pacific theater, air superiority was everything. Both sides knew it. Control the skies, control the islands, and possibly the war. But Japan, facing mounting resource shortages and increasing Allied pressure, had to get creative. Enter the dummy airfields, masterful illusions of bustling military hubs made from bamboo, wood, canvas, and imagination. These weren't just simple decoys. They were sprawling fake bases, complete with runways, aircraft, hangars, and even fuel depots, all designed to fool the prying eyes of American reconnaissance planes and sabotage their bombing runs. Imagine flying over an island, expecting to find a heavily fortified airbase with dozens of warplanes ready for takeoff. Instead, you see gleaming runways, orderly rows of planes, and what looks like the heart of Japan's Pacific air defense. But it's all smoke and mirrors, or rather bamboo and canvas. The Japanese meticulously constructed these dummy fields in strategic locations, often miles away from real bases. The runways were made from compacted earth, covered with painted canvas to mimic tarmac. Wooden planes, many crafted from bamboo, sat in neat rows, each painted with the exact markings of real aircraft. These fake airfields were not just visual tricks. Some had cleverly rigged lighting systems to simulate runway lights at night, enhancing the illusion for low-flying reconnaissance missions. Others included fake tire tracks and even dummy vehicles to complete the picture. The goal was to absorb and redirect American air attacks away from critical infrastructure. And it worked. American intelligence was initially fooled, with many reconnaissance photos misidentifying dummy airfields as genuine, prompting misguided bombing raids. Planes and bombs were wasted on empty fields while real. Japanese air power remained intact elsewhere. These dummy airfields also served a psychological purpose. By creating the appearance of a robust, widespread air defense network, Japan aimed to deter or delay Allied advances. Enemy commanders had to factor in the possibility that every island had multiple airbases, stretching their resources thinner. The illusion bought valuable time. It disrupted Allied planning and allowed Japanese forces to regroup, reinforce, and prepare for counterattacks. Building these decoy bases was no small feat. Thousands of workers, craftsmen, artists, and laborers were mobilized in secret. They worked under threat of enemy air raids and with limited materials, often racing against the clock. Precision was key. Every wooden plane had to be the right size and shape. Every runway line had to look convincing from the air. Even the smallest details, like the placement of fake fuel barrels and makeshift hangars, mattered. In some cases, the Japanese even used smoke generators to simulate activity, making the dummy bases look alive and operational. The success of these dummy airfields is a testament to Japan's ingenuity and adaptability. Despite dwindling resources, they turned deception into a force multiplier, stretching their defensive capabilities far beyond what was physically possible. But the impact went beyond just the battlefield. For American forces, the presence of these decoy bases forced a reassessment of intelligence and reconnaissance tactics. It slowed the pace of Allied advances as commanders hesitated, uncertain which targets were real and which were fake. This uncertainty had a direct effect on the war's timeline. It prolonged Japanese resistance and made every victory harder earned. While the dummy airfields themselves never fired a shot, their presence shaped countless engagements. They became ghostly sentinels, standing silent and unmoving, yet exerting an influence that changed the course of battles. In the end, Japan's dummy airfields are a powerful example of how warfare isn't just about firepower. Sometimes it's about illusion, about making your enemies see what you want them to see, about turning emptiness into a shield. And through these vast, empty runways and wooden plains, Japan fought a shadow war, a war of perception that shaped the skies over the Pacific.